Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Friday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 27th of February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather situation for your community and village by going to weather.gov/Alaska or following along with the Marine VHF broadcast or NOAA Weather Radio. Find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. And if you've done that already, you probably have a quick idea of what's going on across the northwestern Brooks Range. That's where we're going to start our program tonight, talking about the heavy snow potential for areas along the west and the west end of the Brooks Range and the south-facing slopes especially, all the way from the lower and the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys there. Looking at the possibility of 1 to 2 feet of snow on top of some pretty gusty winds. That will likely lower visibility there. We're talking about winter storm warnings at this point. That'll take you well through Saturday. So winter storm warnings for areas north of Kiana and into the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys and the lower end of the valleys as well. So should start to see some snow developing tonight and lasting through a good part of your Saturday. Northward, blizzard conditions are expected to develop as we go through the daytime tomorrow and probably into very early Sunday morning. With those gusts, you might see winds upwards of 55 to even 65 miles per hour at times. Very strong winds blowing through there will likely reduce visibility through at least Saturday and probably into early Sunday morning. Look for those winds, some places, to gust upwards of even 80 miles per hour, especially for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Places like Kaktovik are going to see the worst amount of wind. Not a whole lot of snow falling, but there will be snow that is actually falling out of the clouds as they pass through. So that on top of the blowing snow will likely reduce visibility to probably 0 at times, so be extra careful. Everything else you see is a winter weather advisory at this point for areas along the central and northern interior. We're expecting some snowfall there as well as mainly blowing and drifting snow. Places around Fairbanks could be looking at about 2 to 5 inches by the end of the weekend, and some slightly higher amounts further north you go. Out across Barrow, Wainwright, and the northwestern coastal plain, expecting winter weather advisories there. Those will end first as we go into the early morning hours there. Watch for some stronger gusts, though, upwards of 50 miles per hour. And again, additional snowfall accumulations expected around the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, including places like Shishmaref there as you head down into the St. Lawrence Island region as well. So a lot going on across the northern interior as we start the weekend. We'll get to the Y part of the forecast here in just a few minutes. But as we look at the satellite picture, you can see some of the ingredients that we're going to be talking about. A pretty healthy, steady southerly flow working up through the central and western Bering. Several waves of low pressure across the North Pacific and another much larger system just south of the Kamchatka Peninsula. As you go ahead in time, you'll notice this low pressure system has been drawing a lot of moisture northward, and this is going to start leaning over a little bit more from the south and west. And as that runs right into the western slopes of the Brooks Range, or the southern slopes of the Brooks Range, you're going to get a pretty good setup for very warm, wet air cooling off and running into some of the higher terrain there of the Brooks Range. So it's a really good setup to wring out as much moisture as we can. If it were summertime, chances are you'd see a little bit of rain and snow, but it is wintertime, and it's going to come down as some heavy wet snow in those areas. Now across the rest of Alaska, southeast is getting a little bit of a break. We get our southerly flow working back over south central Alaska as well. And as this wave works in from west to east, we'll likely see snow develop as we head through the late evening hours across places like the Anchorage Bowl, the Matanuska and Susitna valleys. Higher amounts are expected across the Talkeetnas as we head into Saturday night and into Sunday there. But mostly probably about 3 to 6 inches or so around the Talkeetnas there in the northern end of the Susitnas. And then as we head southward, probably about 1 to 3 inches for the Matanuska and lower Susitna Valley, as well as the Anchorage Bowl. Out across the west, you can see that stream of moisture working right over the central Aleutians, coming into St. Paul and St. George, over St. Lawrence Island. And as this gets closer, we'll start to see more and more places reporting snow as we head into tonight and once again into tomorrow, where those winter storm warnings are in effect. and the higher winds will start to crank up across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast and the central Beaufort Seacoast as we head into Saturday. Here's the weather setup now. They've got colder air and several waves of it lined up across the Bering Sea. 1,007 millibars there just west of St. Lawrence Island, and another circulation a little bit further down the coast. One wave of low pressure just east of Point Barrow and northwest of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse this afternoon, and warmer air working its way northward. Already snow was falling around Nome and westward, and also across areas closer to Kivalina and Kiana, and north and west toward Cape Hope and Point Lisburn. As you look around the south central regions, mostly just clouds at this point. Didn't see a whole lot of precipitation showing up on any observations. So as high pressure is holding back that leading edge of precipitation, we'll see a lot more clouds tonight than anything else across south central Alaska. Out across the west, the first front will work it into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. And with winds picking up, there's an increasing chance that we'll start to see more reports of blowing and drifting snow as well across areas north of the Yukon Valley, into the Koyukuk Valley, and across the Brooks Range, where snow will really start to come down a little bit in earnest as we head into tonight and early tomorrow. By Saturday afternoon, the front will have crossed through at least the western half of Alaska, working through the interior with a stronger north and westerly flow. Periods of moderate to occasionally heavy snow should be expected across the western parts of the Brooks Range, and once again, snowfall totals in this area could be looking at 1 to 2 feet of snow, so it is going to come down. High pressure will quickly move in to places like St. Mary's and try to slow down that snowfall. A little bit further south and west toward Bristol Bay, rain and snow may be a part of your day. A rain-snow mix around Prince William Sound and down the Seward Peninsula coastline, or the Kenai Peninsula coastline. You're looking at more of a mix there across the north and western Gulf Coast. But as you move northward, you quickly run into enough cold air that this will fall as snow. And again, a few inches are possible, a light snow perhaps for the Anchorage area. And across the middle Tanana Valley, expect 2 to 5 inches of snow around the Fairbanks region and northward. And once again, the winds are going to blow across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Some of those gusts could range on the order of 60 to as high as 80 miles per hour there. And with that, very poor visibility is expected, and blizzard conditions are also expected during that time. To the west again, we have another wave of colder air working into the western chain. With that, rain and some heavier winds moving back into the west and west central parts of the chain. Southeast still looking pretty good. Got a weak trough of low pressure overhead, but most of the weather is controlled by high pressure, still holding back some of the higher precipitation and keeping that off to your west. So you should enjoy at least a little bit more sunshine than normal until Sunday. And then, of course, that frontal boundary starts to lock in a little bit more. Moisture gathers along that boundary. We see a little bit more of a temperature difference. And with that, we should start to see a chance for some rainfall from north to south across a good chunk of southeastern Alaska. Snowfall is going to remain fairly high at this point, it looks like, but keep an eye on that if you do have some travel plans to take you through the Chilkoot or White Pass region up the Klondike Highway. For South Central, what moves in quickly for Saturday moves out just as quickly on Sunday with conditions clearing up. It will be a little bit cooler there. Here's a fog across the middle and upper Yukon Valley, south and west. Things look to clear up a little bit as well. And out across the west, the Bering Sea continues to be fairly active with one wave of low pressure south of the chain in the Alaska Peninsula and another wave just north of Kiska and Attu. That system's working a little bit more over the eastern sections of Siberia, and everywhere else is kind of catching a quick break before it moves through the western sections of Alaska on Sunday. Here's a look at the temperature map now. Southeast with a little bit of sunshine, enjoying that with 40s and 50s today from Wrangell southward toward Ketchikan and Annette. Fairly mild conditions there around Juneau, out toward Sitka and Yakutat, all in the lower to at least mid-40s there. Haines and Skagway also enjoying the pleasant weather. 30s and 40s around Prince William Sound. Cordova, one of the warmer spots at 42 today. Valdez and Portage showing temps at 36. Same goes for Whittier, upper 30s for Homer and Seward, 29 in Kenai, and a little bit cooler in Anchorage today. 32 around Talkeetna this afternoon. Up around Fairbanks it was 22 as well. Healy showed 35 and Fort Greely was 20. Eagle made it to 23 late this afternoon. Northway was 17. Fort Yukon 30, about the same there around Bettles. 21 for Anaktuvuk Pass, 3 in Arctic Village, and teens and 20s for the Beaufort Seacoast. West of Barrow it was a little bit cooler and only in the single digits. 3 in Atkasuk, 4 in Barrow today. 32 around Kotzebue with Shishmaref, not on the map unfortunately. 30 there for Nome this afternoon. Unalakleet was 31. Grayling showed 25 with Sparivon in the upper 20s. Bethel had 34. And around southwestern Alaska into Bristol Bay, most areas were hovering just at or above freezing today, including King Salmon and Dillingham. Both ends of Kodiak Island were in the mid to upper 30s today. The Alaska Peninsula in the lower 40s, with Pribilofs in the upper 30s to about 40, and 28 at Kiska and Attu there. Overnight lows won't change too much from where you are there right now. Southwest looking at 20s and 30s. 14 in Nome, single digits for Barrow, but above 0. It looks like a low, probably single digits for Arctic Village and Fort Yukon. Mid-teens there for Fairbanks and southward. South Central in the lower to mid-20s. Southeast also in the upper 20s to lower 30s there, with Kodiak Island at 36. Expecting a high tomorrow of 42, with Southwest looking at temperatures also in the lower 40s. North of Bethel, those temperatures will go below freezing, and once again, as that frontal system moves through, we can expect cooler weather to move into southwest Alaska as the day goes on, so rain and snow may both be possible. Lower 20s for Nome, 8 in Barrow, with the Middle Tanana Valley in the upper 20s. Many areas to your south and west downriver will likely be in the lower 30s. South Central at or above freezing for a part of the day, so it will be a warm snow. Southeast expecting temperatures in the upper 30s and lower 40s. Some places like Ketchikan and Annette may actually top out in the mid 40s, so still fairly mild for you. Flying weather includes IFR conditions all the way around the Arctic coast and into Kotzebue Sound tomorrow, and across the west and southern facing coastlines of the Seward Peninsula and the windward side there of the Kuskokwim Delta and the Yukon Delta, as a southwesterly flow blows Bering Sea moisture right into your homes. South Central expecting IFR conditions to form during the day, and this will change fairly quickly from west to east. So what we start out in the morning, if you're flying out of Anchorage or anywhere in South Central and saying, wow, this looks like a really different day than what he was talking about, it is going to change and change quickly during the morning hours. So make your plans accordingly. If you're looking west and you see a big cloud bank moving in, that is going to spread over most of South Central during the day and really most of the interior. So watch for changes as you head out early in the morning. What you come back to will be considerably different, so do be careful. Around Kodiak Island and along the south-facing coastlines of the Alaska Peninsula, expect IFR, and MVFR should hover just offshore of most of southeast. Here's your pass conditions. One of those changes will happen quickly around Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass tomorrow, heading for IFR. Around the Alaska Range, look for VFR to start in both Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, but we'll head to IFR quickly there, and same goes for Rainy Pass during the day. IFR will develop quickly in Windy Pass, and around into Isabel Pass, we expect a little bit more VFR to start, with MVFR conditions developing by the afternoon. Right now, I'm going to hold off on a whole lot of restrictions for Mentasta Pass. Tenita Pass likely flies over to IFR fairly quickly, with snow expected around the Talkeetna and eastward, and into Portage Pass, of course. Quick changes there during the midday hours. Chilkoot and White Pass right now look to be under the effects of high pressure, so all clear there for right now, and enjoy that while it lasts. The warm and wet air is building over the Gulf, with freezing levels as high as 2,000 to 4,000 feet across the Alaska Range and Bristol Bay, and 4,000 to 6,000 feet for most of southeastern Alaska. Icing potential will increase and again move fairly quickly from west to east during the day, above 3,000 to 4,000 feet, with occasional to widespread moderate possible there, and across the west above 6,000 feet for the far western chain, and another patch of freezing and icing potential, I should say, across the Gulf of Alaska, developing from west to east and also moving a little bit further northward during the afternoon. A very active jet stream for us now, a very different story than what we had just weeks ago. Low pressure working its moisture from the North Pacific and into the interior of Alaska on a very fast-moving jet from 100 to about 150 knots. High pressure is still working its way northward into the Gulf, allowing that warm and wet air to move into south central Alaska, and it's being aided by another circulation south of the Alaska Peninsula, with active weather also working into the Pacific Northwest. At 9,000 feet, we still have our southwesterly flow that we were dealing with in the midweek there. It's become a little more zonal, or what we would consider west to easterly flow across the interior of Alaska. Still have that southwesterly shift into the Gulf of Alaska, and more of a northwesterly flow across southeastern Alaska. Wind speeds there around 20 to 30 knots or so across the interior. Considerably higher, anywhere from 30 to as high as 50 knots crossing over the Seward Peninsula, and at 9,000 feet, wind speed is across the Arctic coast, not too bad there. Let's see what they do at 3,000 feet. We can expect at least a steady 40-knot wind, and in some cases that's going to be a little bit higher across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, probably looking at 50 to 55 knots in some isolated cases. Pretty potent southerly flow, also working across the central and western chain. Those wind speeds between 40 and as high as 70 knots out across the western chain. So again, expect some stronger winds at the surface. Because of that, we do expect turbulence to be at least light to isolated moderate, and across the Beaufort Seacoast, we're going to have some isolated areas where wind speeds there could be on the occasional to maybe even isolated severe, and most of that's going to be below 4,000 feet. So again, flying across the Arctic coast tomorrow is going to be very tricky, if not impossible, so plan accordingly. Across the west, below 4,000 feet for the western chain, and some of that at least reaching widespread moderate for the far western reaches there. For most of south central and most of southeast, as far as turbulence goes, not expecting too many problems. Your issues will mainly be visibility in south central and southwest, and of course visibility issues will also be found across the north. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Good evening, I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. This evening our guest is Roger Motzko. Roger's been on our program before and has been a key presenter at a number of our recent safety seminars. But Roger's on this time for a very special reason. He's retiring from the U.S. Navy. For those of you who don't know Roger's background, let me touch on a few highlights, specifically his service to our country. He started out in the U.S. Air Force as a Vietnamese linguist, then found himself in the Navy and ultimately rose to the rank of Navy captain. One of the truly incredible and informative stories he had shared with me was when he was on a previous program, was the 3 years he spent in Bosnia. Roger, welcome back.
Thanks, Harry. I appreciate it.
And before we go any further, thank you for your outstanding service to our country.
Thank you for allowing me to serve.
Talk about the time in Bosnia.
Yeah, so it started out as an assignment to do principally landmine removal. And when I got there, you know, you start looking at the things that a country needs. And working for the President of the United States and the U.S. Embassy for reconstruction of Bosnia, he said, you know, how do we get this started? And my first concern, of course, was transportation and the airport. And how do we make the airport more airworthy? And how do we get transportation in and out and the transportation of goods? Because I believe that peace is sustained by transportation and commerce. And as I worked on that more, the President thought it was more important that I stay and complete that work. And eventually we developed the commercial aviation system in Bosnia. We developed the Bosnian Air Service, and then we developed offshore banks and made $5.2 million in the first year over air routes in order to self-fund the organization, rebuild the navigation aids, and rebuild airports.
So let me go back to what you said, because it's an indicator of truly outstanding service. You went over there for 1 year and you spent 3 years, right?
Right.
Wow, that's above and beyond. Thank you for that. You were mentioning earlier when we were talking that the Bosnians were a lot like the Alaskans.
Bosnians are exactly like Alaskans. You know, they live in a rural area of Central Europe. Transportation surface systems really aren't very good, rutted roads and hazardous mountains. And so they appreciate aviation and they understand that aviation is the way to transport goods. And they happen to sit at that crossroads between Greater Europe and then the Middle East. And of course, on those transportation routes, it's very, very busy. And so the closure of that airspace closed off critical airspace for goods going between the continent of Africa and all the way up into Europe. And so getting that airspace back into civilian control and opening those airspace routes was critically important.
So I may not get this right, but you said something about somebody made a comment to you that, or you made a comment to them that you were from the U.S. and they said, no, you're an Alaskan.
Right. Yeah, my third year I was there with the United Nations and working for Air Vice Marshal Sir Rob Wright. And on the British staff there, you know, we worked through an awful lot of the issues of setting up air regulations. And they once wondered why I used so many U.S. air regulations. And I said, well, you know, that's what I'm familiar with. And they said, but you're not from the United States. You're from Alaska, aren't you? And of course, we think that way as well. We are Alaskans, and Alaskans above all else are aviators. And I think that the Bosnians appreciate that because everyone speaks aviator.
Now, Roger, you're got a very important job with the FAA, and you're going to stay on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just going to put your Navy uniform.
I'm going to put my Navy uniform in the closet and hat up on the shelf.
You know, I think what I'd like to do is get you back on again and talk about what you said were the 5 ATC-related safety concerns.
Right. Each year, the FAA looks at 5 things that present what we feel are the highest risk to the aviation system. And this year we looked at, no surprise to any of us, weather, both the dissemination of weather and then pilots reporting weather, and so how we can do that better. We looked at surface memory aids, so runway incursions. How can we help controllers keep runways safer? How can we remind pilots how to report their positions on airports? We looked at positive control of VFR traffic, so people like you and I that fly, are we getting adequate vectoring when we're positioned around airports? And then we looked at, lastly, judgment. So things like, can controllers anticipate the difference between airspeeds, climbs and descents of 737s versus that Super Cub, and then put all of that together in that critical spacing piece?
Well, let's do this because we have run out of time. I think you want to put together a special program that will illustrate those points. So I'll get you back on. Probably won't be next time, but probably in the next month or so. And I think our audience would really enjoy seeing that. In the meantime, again, thank you for your service to the country, and congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. And until next time, fly safe.
Thanks, Harry. See you again on Monday. Today's sea ice edge is continuing to move just a little bit more northward there, heading toward Nunivak Island, still on the south side though, and north of St. Paul and the Pribilofs, and moving a little bit further away from the Bristol Bay region. A lot of the ice that you see across the northern shore there is kind of eroding a little bit. A lot of that probably not too shore fast. And as you look at Callaghan Island there, you can see how the ice has been moving northward across Cook Inlet. We'll see how that changes with the course of colder weather moving in from west to east over the course of the weekend. Across southeast now, we're looking at relatively light southerlies working up into the Lynn Canal from Stevens Passage and Frederick Sound. Northwesterlies across Clarence Strait, also fairly light. And a light onshore flow from the west and southwest from Yakutat all the way to Sitka. More of a northwesterly flow outside of the Dixon entrance there with a 5-foot sea. By Sunday, things change a little bit. Winds are starting to pick up more from the north out of the Lynn Canal and heading southward. Still fairly light across Clarence Strait with a 3-foot sea. Northerlies coming down the outer coastline from about 15 to 20 knots. 5 to 7-foot seas are expected there on Sunday. Across South Central, most of the winds are going to stay fairly light for Saturday there. Even a variable flow on the northern Cook Inlet, 2-foot seas there in the ice-free waters. Northeasterly south of Callaghan Island, more of a south and southeasterly flow crossing the Barrens at 15 to 20 knots, and light winds inside and outside of Prince William Sound. As we get into Sunday, things are going to change just a little bit more. Those northerlies kick in and pick up speed. South of Callaghan Island, you can see the winds up to 25 knots. 20-knot wind there from the north and east through Shelikof Strait. And more of a light flow inside of Prince William Sound across the north and western Gulf, though. Those winds pick up to about 10 to 20 knots and still a little bit variable outside of Resurrection Bay. Northeasterlies east of Kodiak Island could reach up to 20 knots with a 5-foot sea on Sunday. For the Alaska Peninsula, light southwesterly onshore flow at 10 knots there with a 2-foot sea. Northeasterly south of Sand Point, still at 20 knots with a 7-foot sea. And as we get into Sunday, everything becomes easterly there. 35 knots inside of Bristol Bay with a 3-foot sea, and 25 to 30 knots there across the Pacific coastline with seas running between 6 and about 10 feet. 5-foot seas north of Cold Bay on Sunday. Across the Aleutians, the strongest winds will be on Saturday with a south and easterly flow with a high gale there, 45 knots with a 13 to as high as 24-foot sea. North and easterly winds for the central and eastern chain, 20 knots in most areas, 4 to 6-foot seas on the Bering side and 6 to 7-foot seas on the Pacific side. Southeasterlies pick up a little bit more in mass on Sunday there, 20 to 25 knots in all areas with 7 to 8-foot seas in the Bering and 9 to 12-foot seas in the Pacific. Southwesterlies shift there though from Kiska to Attu at 25 to 30 knots and 16 to 17-foot seas should be expected to close out the weekend. As we get across the west coast, northwesterlies will be coming in down the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta and into areas north of Hooper Bay toward Ammonok. About 15-knot winds there coming in from the west around St. Matthew And variable and relatively light winds for the Pribilofs with a 5-foot sea on Saturday. By the time you get to Sunday, look for a south and easterly flow coming up the west coast. 30 knots or so at the strongest around St. Lawrence Island. St. Matthew at 35, 25 knots there for the Pribilofs with an 8-foot sea, 15-foot seas expected around St. Matthew as we get into Sunday afternoon. And now for the Arctic coast, northwesterly winds will follow that cold front coming in around 25 to 30 knots on Saturday. We have low pressure working across the northern coast, so you're going to see a wind shift here from Point Barrow eastward toward Prudhoe Bay, where we have a south and southeasterly flow around 20 knots. As we get into Sunday, look for those winds to scream in from the west, the strongest of which will be across the northern sections of the eastern Beaufort seacoast there from Prudhoe Bay toward Kaktovik. Again, we're expecting the strongest winds as we get into late Saturday and into early Sunday, so watch for blizzard conditions along the coastline and offshore. Higher gusts should be possible there. Southeasterlies blowing out of Kotzebue Sound and off of Cape Lisburne will continue working warmer air northward once again following the latest frontal boundary, and another one is on the way. Here's a look at the weather map one more time as we head through the rest of the night and head toward Saturday and Sunday. Blizzard warnings are going to be in effect for the central and eastern Beaufort seacoast. We just saw the winds, and that is why. Blowing and drifting snow should be an issue there. Not a whole lot of snow falling in the area, maybe a couple inches. The better chance for accumulating snow with winter storm warnings in effect for the lower and upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys will be ahead of this low pressure system here on the south-facing slopes of the western Brooks Range. You could see as much as 1 to 2 feet. You are looking at accumulating snow across the Seward Peninsula, and as the frontal boundary works into the interior, and quickly so during the daytime tomorrow, places like Fairbanks in the middle Tanana Valley and most of the central interior, in fact, is looking at least some light accumulating snow, 2 to about 5 inches in general, and again, that would be the Fairbanks region as well. Lighter accumulations for the Eagle and 40-mile country there. Most areas seeing a couple inches and a reduction in visibility with blowing and drifting winds. And South Central also looking for some light snow. Enjoy your weekend.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.